We're back again. No lead-in music this time. There was a glitch in the system and it did not go live while the video played. Man, I'm so glad that we caught that now instead of 5 minutes from now, which is what happened to us last time. But we're back. Hey, Jonathan, how are you doing? How are things last week?
We missed you, but Ian did a great job filling in. Fun fact, Ian and I actually go way back, spanning like a decade outside of our guide point, life together. And so it was really cool to kind of have him on as a guest, and it felt like I was just chatting with a buddy. He's no you. We definitely miss you. But we have a slew of wonderfully talented individuals here that'll always take the opportunity to fill in when one of us is not available.
Yeah. Well, that is. I'm so glad that it went well. I was up in Alaska doing some more shows for the weekend, and that's why I sound like I got hit by a truck because travel plus Alaska apparently equals sick every time. But we have some great stories to go over with everyone today. Some really interesting things. But before we get into any of them, we do have to go ahead and say that the views and opinions that Jonathan and I express are our own. They're not necessarily the official views and opinions of GuidePoint Security. We're just a couple of guys talking about security and the stories that we find and the things that we think are interesting. So, Jonathan, you actually pulled. The funny thing is that you pulled some stories and then I pulled some stories that it turned out that I was just pulling the same stories that you were pulling. Do you want to go ahead and take us away with our first story here?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, looks like did we mention it was GPS Live for me?
Yeah, it is GPS Live for May 24th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching this live, that's fantastic. Go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about what we're saying. If you've got any thoughts, and if you're watching this on demand, we're so glad that you're here too.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, now that our disclaimer's out of the way and we skip the bumper for today, no, we'll just jump right in here. First off, if you haven't seen the news lately, Microsoft is talking about some new features, more focused in their Windows 11 platform, which, I don't know, I get the feeling like we're going to be on another one of those, like every other version of Windows is good things. But but so far, the latest I'm not so sure about upgrading the Windows 11 feature is something called Recall. And it's starting to kick a lot of interest around the privacy aspects, more specifically about how its function is being used to capture and store screenshots, right? We were joking a little bit before the show about how potentially whatever's on your screen, whatever that content may be, is now being, captured, stored, and furthermore analyzed, right? It sounds a lot scarier when you put it all together.
Yeah, so this is part of an event that Microsoft held on Monday that was all about AI and their new pushes towards that. They released announced some new hardware that's kind of like built around AI. And the funny thing is, Microsoft's not the only one doing this, right? Yeah. Google also held their I/O event last week where they pushed how AI is going to be used in their new platforms moving forward. Everyone is reorienting towards this. So ChatGPT had their new ChatGPT 4.0.
That rollout is still causing some waves.
It's going great. I wish the best to Scarlett Johansson in her future legal endeavors. So Microsoft announced this whole slew of AI features and new PCs and stuff. And there was some really cool stuff in there, but this one in particular is worrying. And I think the interesting thing is that it's not the first time that we've had to be worried about this kind of feature before, right? So this recall feature that they're talking about in its context, or in the way that they're presenting it, sounds great. Like, oh, I remember I was looking at a thing a couple days ago. What was that? Let me go back and see if I can find those snapshots. Who among us has not tried to dive through, a year and a half of Chrome history to find one URL that we were like, there was an interesting thing on that site that I wanted. But we used to have this with Apple's time capsule, right? The way that it would automatically create backups of your machine. But that was in an era where we weren't as worried about people accessing those things as we are now. And so the way that this one in particular works is that it's constantly screenshotting everything that you're doing on your computer analyzing it through a large language model to determine exactly what was happening on your screen, and create a log that anyone can look at. And that introduces all kinds of huge security concerns, not only for the private individual, but especially for organizations and businesses, right? If this happens to be turned on or get turned on, or there's a rollout and accidentally that flag isn't turned off, for business accounts, I mean, the amount of information that it flows across one employee's screen, that could be company confidential, is insane, and that's then getting shuttled out to AI to be analyzed and then dumped as a recording back on that machine.
Yeah, now they are mentioning like the initial raw, some of the specifics talk about this neural processing unit, right?
Yeah.
And that again, they're claiming to be on device, but I imagine as we're still trying to figure things out here, not everybody has a neural processing unit. This is probably part of that hardware mention that you brought up regarding the bigger, presentation from this week. But that doesn't mean that there's still the ability for this data to be offloaded from a screenshot form to something else. For instance, what's happening here is Microsoft saying is that the data is going to be encrypted using BitLocker tied to the user's Windows account. So it's going to be specific to the user, but what about cases or scenarios where profile data is offloaded or centralized within an organization? For instance, if you're doing hoteling and your profile is going to migrate from workstation to workstation based on wherever you log in, right? So now suddenly the data has left the individual device and moved itself to somewhere else, on top of the fact that there's a lot of, we'll say, BitLocker hacks that are happening from time to time. The recovery process is also one potential side attack. But beyond that, I get that what's trying to do, right? I think it's really clever to be like you said, man, what was I doing 2 months ago? And there was a really cool website and it had this thing on it. And, AI automatically read the screen and, categorized it as a website about, video cards. But there's a second part where they're also trying to help with the privacy, right? And incognito, is that what they say?
Yeah, basically. So if you go through the announcement of it and the statements, they are allowing you to select specific apps that you don't want this to take place in, and hone it down. We all know that the more toggles and settings and options that you put into something, definitely the more user engagement those toggles get. So they're saying that, but one of the biggest problems is, they are or not problems, but one of the things that they said is oh yeah, if you're in Microsoft Edge and you're using private browsing mode, then of course we would never screenshot that and analyze it and record it. We all know that that's right. Best laid plans of mice and men kind of thing, right? You can't really trust that is actually what's happening after Google revealed, or after it was revealed that Google was using everything from private modes in their browsers. But beyond that, despite them having all of these things, these layers that they are saying are adding security, right? The fact that it's supposed to be encrypted with BitLocker, that it should only happen on device. Again, a thing that Google said about the AI stuff on their the new phone lines, the new Pixel 8s when they released them, they're like, all these things are on device AI processing, and it turned out it was mostly going to the cloud. Or I think another security concern here, right, when you start talking about cloud AI processing, is the fact that it was revealed that Amazon's cashierless store systems, the ones where it was you could just walk through and grab stuff off the shelves and put it in your cart and it totaled it up magically and you paid for it as you walked out. And they're like, it's all AI. It then was revealed that it was actually just a lot of cameras and
was it 1,000 people watching the camera?
Yeah, 1,000 people in India watching the camera feeds constantly, right? This kind of stuff is bound to come out about any kind of new feature like this, because we live in an age where saying you have the thing and releasing a version of it is more important than actually having the fully baked thing. So cybersecurity experts are still obviously and rightly concerned about this, right? How are those screenshots actually stored? How is this semantic model and the searchable database actually being stored? Right? What is protecting that exclusively? How do we know it's not going to be unencrypted at any point? We actually just had, the recent thing, we were talking about this just before the show with Apple and deleted photos coming back up because of a database error, right? Like there was just an issue within the iPhone itself that resurfaced these things. So if I go delete all of this data from my machine, how do I know that it's actually deleted? If it's deleted, is it still encrypted? Right? Like where do these things go? There's so many concerns that are raised about this, not to mention you bake these things into an operating system, and suddenly every security professional in the world has to worry about new registry keys to edit and protect.
Yeah, no, talking about that, like, right. So Microsoft has come clean and made it very clear that in their technical documentation, there are group policies that can be pushed out to disable this recall function company-wide. Right. Yep. So that's the first thing you're going to be looking for in your directory policy is get that cut. But furthermore, right, I think we're also now going to suddenly see new waves of malware targeting the fact that this exists and looking to pilfer that information, right? Logged in user may already have access to certain things, regardless of the fact that it's encrypted on disk. We'll see things honed. We're already seeing attacks directly on Copilot,
right,
being the primary foundation of a 365 experience. And what Copilot has access to is now, being queried by these malware components to see what it is aware of and what it can find quicker than regular like index searching or quicker than linear searching file by file.
And they've already admitted as well that it has no content moderation within the system, right? So it records a password field, it records confidential agreements, it records everything that is on the screen. If you have not turned off access to that thing specifically, it will see it. And if you have turned on access, it doesn't have a way inside that access to say, oh, that right there, there's a fillable field that says password above it, so I shouldn't record that. There's no way for it to do that. I give it 6 months before we see a write-up of a piece of malware and attack flow that specifically says like it then targets group policy to enable recall on all right. All right, I should say I give it 6 months before a piece of malware is doing that. I give it about a year to a year and a half before we see a write-up of a massive breach that was caused because a piece of malware that laid dormant for a year, the first thing that it did was turn on recall in group policy.
Yeah. Well, producer Ben before the show also mentioned like this is literally what malware does. It captures your screen. All that's forgotten about is adding the webcam to the story, and now goodbye privacy. So
goodbye privacy. But here's one story. Moving on because we've got to keep things clipping here. The next story that we have is one of the ones that both Jonathan and I found separately. And that we've been talking about a lot recently, this overarching concept of the fact that Rockwell Automation, major industrial control systems manufacturer, has put out a statement urging customers to take devices that do not strictly require internet access and were not designed to have internet access. Please take those off of the internet. Please stop hooking them up to the internet. So we've talked about this a lot before. We've been talking about SCADA systems and ICS and the vulnerabilities that are present there and how they could be exploited. In fact, there's a great blog on GuidePoint Security's website from a researcher, Pascal Ackerman, who found some flaws within some, I believe, within some Rockwell Automation platforms. But there's this push, this move to take ICS, these systems that control very granular functions in our day-to-day lives that we may not even be aware of, right? There's this move towards OT, right? Combining all of these things together so that they're accessible and you can manage them the same way that you manage the rest of your platforms. And it all moves towards that ease of accessibility and that ease of use, which is a good thing, right? It sucks that if an ICS device breaks and it's not connected to the internet, you have to like send a tech out to do very granular maintenance on these things. But as we've connected these things to the internet, these are devices that were never made to be connected to the internet. So they don't have built-in network security. They don't have built-in security at all in a lot of cases, because they're running super lean. They have enough processing power to do the thing that they're supposed to do, and that's about it. So Rockwell advises, hey, take these things offline. And interestingly, the reason that they cite is rising geopolitical tensions, right? They're like, hey, we recognize that we're controlling most of the major resources in some of these countries. You should take these things offline.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen attacks that are politically related against SCADA and ICS networks, but more specifically, this one kind of goes in deep. When it's focusing specifically on Rockwell, we're talking about 7 different CVEs being called out here with a minimum of 5.5, one scoring a perfect 10 for those keeping track at home. And the idea is it's not just also these devices, because like you said, oftentimes they're very purpose-built, focused, minimalistic, and they're talking actually to some kind of controller system. In the industry, they call it an HMI. But the idea is what if this HMI, this console that controls all the devices, is on the internet? Or what if that HMI is remotely accessible from another system, and that system obviously now is on the internet? So the whole idea is okay, so we're going to take this little measurement device, this sensor, this widget, let's put that on a secured network that's not connected to the internet. But then we furthermore have to make sure that everything that talks to these devices at any point in the chain is also secured, and not in an example case, browsing the internet and being exploited by some kind of drive-by, or running random executables off of a thumb drive that's brought into your environment. But yeah, it's a continued push, right? CISA has been talking about this for a long time. We've talked about this for a long time on the show, right? And it's going to become even more challenging because a lot of these devices may be in places that are considered dangerous or disaster zones, or even radioactive. And so you can't necessarily interact with a lot of these things in person. You have to be able to do it from a distance, securely, remotely, or even potentially across the internet in some strange cases. And so cranking up your PLC security.
Yep. And this is a lot of this too. There's some research that was presented by a group from Georgia Institute of Technology that found that it was possible to perform Stuxnet style attacks. If we remember Stuxnet, right? The malware that was used, I believe, against Iran, right? And their nuclear programs, to do exactly this, right? To falsify readings and falsify outputs from these systems, so that the system automatically, or a human manually, caused ore refineries for nuclear materials to basically go on the fritz and ruin their entire process and break themselves. So this coming directly from Rockwell is pretty huge, I believe, because that is the manufacturer saying hey, don't use our stuff in ways that it wasn't intended to be used. You can't throw things online that were not originally meant to be online. Now, there are security mitigations and systems. Obviously, you can create walls upon walls upon walls of security around these things. But in the end, right, if the system wasn't designed to be online and was never designed to handle these threats, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, which actually this kind of does give us the opportunity to help pivot or segue into our next story, which also kind of has a little bit of a geopolitical backing.
Yeah.
Which again, go secure your SCADAs. But this article coming to us that I was looking at earlier, and it's not necessarily technology in the sense, but it's definitely influential. Coming to us from Defense Scoop is the retired General Jim Mattis, and you had a name for him because you are a member of the Defense Forces.
Jim Mad Dog Mattis was his name. He was in control of the forces in Afghanistan and the Middle East. He was called Mad Dog.
All right. Well, this former defense secretary was speaking this week earlier about what he perceives as going to be the vulnerabilities here in our nation's future, especially when it comes to foreign influence. I would hope by now that, you know, our viewers are no stranger to what's going on in the political atmosphere as far as the advent of misinformation and these propaganda machines that are popping up all over the world to push a certain agenda. And retired General Mattis has really focused on this kind of aspect in his talk, you know, going as far as to say, you know, these influence operations, our country is more vulnerable and more, you know, of a lucrative place for these enemies to go after right now, right? He's talking about us, and he's also talking about our close partners in Europe.
Yeah. So the things that he highlights, right, is the fact that information warfare has really become the place to be, right? We've been in this for decades now, kind of Cold War era standoff with major world powers, right, where it was focused on weapon systems, and we're not able to actually, you know, conduct full-on invasions and stuff. Like, no one's going to go to war in these major powers. They don't want to go to war with each other directly because it would cause mass death and destruction, right? It would be terrible. And so we, you know, geopolitically, countries have been trying to find ways to defend themselves and go on the offensive in ways that are not direct. And this information warfare is what he's highlighting as the major battleground, right? So the fact that these influence campaigns can be spun up to try and influence and sway public opinion one way or the other about certain issues. Actually, I just saw yesterday. TikTok had published a report on influence campaigns that they had taken down, that they had identified and taken down, tied to major geopolitical actors, or at least coming out of those regions, trying to influence and sway public opinion about different things. But something I think is interesting there is that people that we would traditionally consider allies, right? If we want to look at ourselves as the good guys and our allies, right?
Like the Five Eyes.
Right, the Five Eyes, right? There were influence campaigns that TikTok was like, yeah, we found this one within this country that was being run by a country to sway public opinion towards certain things, right? It is a double-headed axe, right? It cuts both ways, or two-edged sword. That's the one that I was going for. It cuts both ways. But he also talked about actual security itself, right? The security of elections and election systems. And an interesting thing that he says here is he believes that there's like a 99.9% chance. This quote's actually kind of inverted. It's very strange. There won't be actual meddling in voting systems, and that counts will be accurate. So with almost 100% certainty, he's saying, yeah, counts are going to be accurate with voting systems. There's not going to be major meddling with the voting systems themselves. What we have to look at is the human element.
Yeah. So what we're digging at here is that, you know, the actual vote, the systems, the units, all that. What he's saying is that's not necessarily going to be the concern. The concern is going to be how a lot of these different propaganda campaigns are going to affect the individuals. And so, you know, being aware and understanding where your information is coming from and how your social media experience is influencing you, although you may not be aware of it. Is really where General Mattis is coming at here. He also talked a little bit about the concept of cyber within the U.S. military, and, you know, something that we're seeing across the board is how AI is slowly starting to influence military around the world. There are constantly having discussions regarding do not let AI be the one who pulls the trigger. Do not let AI be the one who makes the decision at the end of the day, because we're already seeing, you know, the cleverness of ChatGPT providing solutions like using glue to stick cheese to pizza.
Love that.
It was a good article. But just imagine where that could come when it comes to something more rash, like in a warfare environment. I also kind of pulled an article earlier. We sidelined it, but the idea was that even AI is being used in 911 call centers today. And so we're seeing it across the board. But as I mentioned, General Mattis is saying it's technology is enormous right now, right? And that's coming from his quote. And he's right. We're going to have to stay alert with artificial intelligence and machine learning because it's going to change our battlefields.
Yeah, it's going to change battlefields. He calls it the fundamental nature of warfare has not yet changed in the last 10,000 years. But I think that's potentially short-sighted. Feels weird since he's talking about 10,000 years, but the rapid advance that we've seen in the way that this technology is being employed and the ways that things are advancing as far as AI is concerned. It was just several months ago that the US military was vowing, hey, we will never let an AI pull the trigger, right? We're never going to use AI in these ways. There's already stories coming out about how the US military is testing AI piloted, fighter jets and
and apparently it was like a huge success.
Yeah, and it was a huge success. So it's just right, like these things are going to happen. It's going to advance, and so the concept of breaking cybersecurity out into its own branch within the DoD and military has been bandied about before, but he does call for state leadership, for U.S. leadership to give the Department of Defense and U.S. Cyber Command a greater role in the case of a cyber attack that is actually targeted and used as part of warfare. But importantly, I think is this quote that I loved at the end of it was just, you've got to look at technology as one tool in your toolbox.
Yeah.
You take full advantage of it, but make sure that you make certain that you're integrating it right. And I think for all of us who are not, Department of Defense side, this goes back to the original thing that he was saying anyway, which is like, yeah, our systems are probably secure. The technology is one tool in the toolbox. The people are the thing that we have to worry about. And that's always going to be true in cybersecurity. We have one more story and just a couple more minutes to get to it.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into this one. This was actually where our titles for today's show came from.
Yes.
Jonathan and I have been trying to give ourselves joke names that are based on at least one story. And so that's where this one today comes from, which is JAVS 8, JAVS 8. A software that is used in courtrooms around the world. Over 10,000 courtrooms utilize this software to record their audio and video and transcripts of everything that is happening in the courtroom. The official version of JAVS, I believe 8.3.7, contained a malicious backdoor and was hosted on their website for download.
Yeah, and so the big story here is the legit website, legit application, everything, somewhere in their supply chain or development chain, somebody was able to slip in a backdoor, and a file called FFFmpeg, and again, for those who play along at home, it's just FFmpeg, 2 Fs, was part of the package that the installer package that was distributed through the official sources, and it did indeed contain a backdoor. And when launched, triggered a whole bunch of different things, including a bit of known malware called RustDoor. It's already kind of making its way across courtrooms here. And from my perspective, there's got to be a deep story here about how does an official source of a download for an official piece of software become compromised, right? And this puts it a lot in perspective of companies that also develop software and how they are securing their, SDLC, their shift left, their CI/CD, whatever you want to call it these days. We ran a story recently. Remember the XZ, where it was a 2-year sleeper to backdoor an official piece of software, and it got distributed through official channels. And so we're trying to, determine more about what happened here as more information becomes available. But you said there's a cleanup process or something that needs to happen from here, right?
Yeah, so researchers, I believe it was at Rapid7 who found this. They pointed out, like, hey, anyone who has 8.3.7 installed on their system, and again, this came from an official source, this 8.3.7 version, needs to re-image any endpoint that ever had it installed. You can't simply uninstall it. Reset the credentials for any accounts that were ever logged into those affected endpoints. Reset credentials within web browsers on the affected endpoints, so anything that was ever logged into on those machines. And then install the newest version of the JAVS viewer, 8.3.8 or higher. Now, those are pretty standard steps. You probably would want to go a little bit further than that and do some more investigation, figure out, hey, once this was installed, what did it reach out and infect it potentially across the rest of the courtroom environment? But those are at least the baseline minimum steps that you have to do is a full reimage and reset of all credentials that could have ever been installed or utilized on that machine. JAVS, for their part, did release confirm to Rapid7 that they pulled all versions of 8.3.7 from their website. They reset all their passwords, and they conducted a full internal audit of all JAVS systems, and have confirmed that everything that's currently available on their website is clean. and they verified that their source code, certificates, systems, and other system releases were not compromised during the incident.
Okay. But, this is definitely a lesson learned across everybody, whether you're downloading software from an official source or, as we always warn, do not download from third parties or unauthorized sources. But it can still be difficult. You want to make sure that you take your basic security measures into play here. Having the fact that this was a known malware, hopefully would be that all major EDR tools would have picked up on it. In fact, in the article, they do call out that 30 different endpoint tools did identify successfully. And I hope that number grows, with things like VirusTotal. As always, whenever we call out a brand or a name, we're not necessarily speaking poorly or endorsing any of those. It just happens to help us make sure that we're telling the full story. We just want to make sure that is mentioned as part of this.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. We are just about a minute over here. So thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of May 24th, 2024. We will catch you next week. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy some time off, hopefully, some time with family and friends. And until next week, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you all next time.